Hello and welcome back. Today, in this series on vacations with autism and other difficulties, disabilities, etc., we're talking about transportation methods. So, today we're specifically going to talk about methods of transportation and the pros and cons of major forms of travel and why some of them may or may not work better than others, as well as the idea or sometimes the necessity to mix transportation forms on vacation. Some important things to remember when planning your vacation and methods of transportation on vacation are distance, what options of transportation are available for any stretch of the vacation. Are there some options that you only want to consider when you're at your destination? Are there some options you only want to consider for the means to get to your destination? Is there a form of transportation you want to be the focus or point of your vacation? What kind of stress and difficulties might be present for individuals in your party for that given form or forms of transportation? We will do another video on transportation, a part 2 on transportation, that will deal with ways to mitigate or work with various forms of transportation. That's separate. And finally, cost. Now, I do mention that stress and difficulties are important to consider, even if ways to mitigate or work with them or work with difficulties around transportation is a separate video, because sometimes stress can be so large, such as phobias or such compulsive disorders, etc., can be such an impactor, or just stress and anxiety can be such large impactors that it can be worthwhile just to pursue a different form of transportation entirely, just due to the amount of stress that a given form of transportation invokes on its own. So let's start with the least, from my research, was the least common form of transportation to get to a destination on a vacation. So let's start with one, if not the least common form of transportation on vacation: boats. Personally, I love boats, but objectively they can come with a lot of ups and downs like the tides. I will try not to go awash with an overflow of puns about aquatic travel. However, aquatic travel, both above and below the waves, is one of my autistic fixations, so it may be a problem. Please hang with me. Okay? Most people, unlike me, love drama. I don't like drama. Most people who like drama would like watching things like the Titanic or Poseidon. About boats. Not me. I like the boats. I don't like watching the movies. So can we start with the hard parts? And by we can we, I mean we can. And we will. We'll start with the hard parts of boat travel before we come back to port for the positives. One first difficulty is that a significant percentage of people are prone to seasickness, which is great for feeding the fishes. Not so great for the person who's got seasickness and the people around them. And one thing we'll talk in on the next video in this series is that, yeah, you can take meds to help with that, among other things. Second, it's the most time inefficient option on this list, which leads us into our next point, which is that it's an isolated space. When pairing that with the fact that it's time inefficient, means that it's a great breeding ground for colds and viruses, because you're basically taking an isolated petri dish of a whole bunch of people and whatever they carried onto the boat cold-wise or virus-wise, and putting it in a giant, jet-propelled bubble bath. And it's getting tossed and turned, and everything's getting nice and warm, and, well, it's a great breeding ground for viruses. So there's that. Finally, there's a significant number of phobias that are relatively common about water or boats or boat travel, storms, etc. And while I might not have these phobias are not something to be taken lightly, even if you don't have them or don't share them. They're serious and they're important. So now that we've gotten through those rough waters, it's time to bring the positives into dock. For one, boats can be comfortable. They're sort of luxurious. Your personal space is your space. You've got your own digs, your own room. It's private-ish. It's nice. A lot of boats are basically floating cities, especially cruises. Basically everything you can find on land, you can find on sea. Shops, movie theaters, entertainment of all kinds, restaurants. And it's usually surprisingly of good quality for those who are taking it as passengers. And depending on where you are in your vacation or travel, it can basically be like a floating hotel. Now, I need to put a little asterisk here because there are costs to the local industry, the local infrastructure, when these cruise ships go down rivers or through ports and frequent them, and there's costs to social networks, and those are important things to pay attention to. It's really unfortunate, and it can be very catastrophic and damaging, and it's something very crucial to look into if you are considering using a boat or as a floating hotel as part of your vacation design. It's the costs to local areas of that particular region. It's something to look into and something to pay to not turn a blind eye to. Now, finally, many boats also have some form of accommodation. This is pretty variable, though, depending on which company made the boat initially and which company is presently running the ship. Who's running the boat? Who floats your boat? Who boats your float? Anyway, I think that's a good place to weigh anchor for the positives. From here, we're going to disembark the topic of boats and move on to the next form of transportation and what it brings to station. Or doesn't. All aboard for trains. Another less common form of transportation, at least in the United States, I know it's more common elsewhere, is trains. They are used on vacations. They're used for transportation in general. Trains. Trains and monorails can show up as methods of transit, especially outside of the United States. So all of you who are outside the United States, I'm so sorry that America is not up to par on this and that so many Americans are naive about trains being a valid means of transportation. And I'm sure lots of them show up looking like sillies. Anywho, trains are a great form of transportation in my opinion. I'm not someone who has a fixation on trains. There's lots of people who have autism who are. I'm not one of them. I think they're cool. I don't know much about them, comparatively speaking. There are places, if you are traveling in the United States, that use them as part of their shindig, like Disney. And they can also be incorporated into your trip as part of the transportation on the trip. You can do sort of like a boat. You can travel from point A to point B, staying overnight on a train. Sleeper trains are still a thing. I hope that's what they're called. I might have gotten that. Oh, good. Anyway, anywho, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. I didn't include the actual name in my script. I'm sorry. With trains, there are some but limited accommodations available due to their size and their limited shape. And there's not much training on the trains. Oh, they have some handicap accessibility and some other services available, but they are very limited. They're more cramped than boats, They do get they're a lot faster, and they've got nice views, just like boats. And they do have some personal private space compared to some other forms of transportation on this list that don't. And you have a place to stay on the transportation, like boats, and they are on the cheaper end of things, which is nice. So, that's what we've got for trains. So, in the middle, we have buses in 3 out of 5. Straight drop in the middle. Buses are among the most economically viable options for traveling on a vacation, and they're more commonly talked about, especially for groups, than trains, and this is even with trains being potentially cheaper and more comfortable and environmentally friendly than buses. However, the ease of booking a group with a bus compared to the ease of booking a group with a train is drastically different. And the limited train systems, at least in the United States, has kept buses as a more prominent option, again, at least in the United States, as a transportation consideration from point A to point B, at least in recent years. There are some downsides to buses. They're generally cramped. Historically, bathrooms on buses are gambles for individuals with obsessive compulsive disorders and some various phobias. On the upside, like many options on this list, save the next one, they tend to come with complimentary Wi-Fi, something I haven't mentioned, but almost everything except for the next item on this list has complimentary Wi-Fi almost all the time. Not all the time. Sometimes you have to pay a few extra bucks. But almost everything on this list has some form of Wi-Fi relatively inexpensively available compared to the next option on this list. And there's also some limited accessibility available with buses. For example, at time of writing, most buses can fit 2 passengers with a wheelchair or mobility scooter by removing seats. Not all of them, but most of them can fit at least 2 by removing seats. I want to emphasize that. And however, not all companies do that. Like I want to point out, it's not every company. Though most companies do want to point out, at least in the United States, that they're committed to serving individuals with disabilities, though they don't go into detail as to what that means. And usually for the companies, when they're on their United States websites, they like to point towards following the American Disabilities Act. So, as always, with all things, when you're looking for accommodations and accessibility, what's on a website, what's in a pamphlet, what's in a flyer, what's somewhere, it only means so much. Send an email, get a phone call, talk to someone, and make sure you get it in writing, somehow attached to whatever reservations you make, what to expect for you and your family, so that you have the contact, and then you have a follow-up contact from them with what to expect for services, for accommodations, even before you pay, so that you know what you're getting yourself into, and if it's even worth getting yourself and your family and the people you're traveling with into, if that's what you really want to do. So that you know what to expect, you know what's actually available, and if it's really worth doing. Because there's too much vagueness, too much uncertainty, too much constant change in this world to rely on something that might not even be fully accurate or might not be detailed, and might change when you get there, by the time you get there, because whatever they're holding themselves to might have changed by the time you got there. So the second most common form of travel, especially in the United States, is your own vehicle. I know that can be hard for some people outside the United States to believe, especially when you're traveling on like 500,000 miles and people are like, what? You don't drive that? Yeah, we do. It's called a road trip. Especially, not necessarily a car. It can be a car. It can be a truck, an SUV, a minivan, a van, not down by the river. Anyway, You get the idea. So what's the benefits to, we'll call them for this point, cars? To mean your personal vehicle. Well, before we get into the benefits, let's tackle the difficulties with traveling by your car. First, it's limited space. Most personal vehicles are not very spacious, even if you've got the super spacious, hyper expensive SUV or van. Not even minivan, van. It's gonna be probably not, unless you're riding by limo with like 3 people, it's not gonna be very spacious. And most people don't have a personal limo to go on a road trip with. So that doesn't make sense. It's not a cost-effective form of travel. The energy to travel, no matter what form of travel, can be costly. On top of the energy costs, there's the wear and tear on your vehicle. That's an additional cost. It is, whether or not it's your own vehicle. Renting a car, that's going to be an extra cost for mileage, etc. There's often no Wi-Fi, and if there is, you're paying for it. You have to use your own data, or you have to pay for the service for their own Wi-Fi. And some people get car sick just like they get seasick. That's normal. And that can be really torturous and arduous. Finally, whoever's driving the vehicle, even if you take turns, driving the vehicle can be taxing on an individual, especially if they have some kind of physical difficulty or disability. For example, I have Ehlers-Danlos, so if I drive for over 2 hours, I might be in pretty bad pain the next day and stiffness. It's a reality I have to live with. And that means road trips, I love them. They're going to be painful and arduous. But do I enjoy them? Sure. Are they painful? Also, yes. But it's something to consider when planning and thinking about these things and whether or not that's something I would want to do. On the upsides for traveling by car during a vacation, again, car in quotes, you can stop the vehicle anytime you want. Well, you and your group want. If there's something you spontaneously want to see. Want to stop at the ice cream shop that you just saw because it looked cool and somebody wants an ice cream? Sure. Want to stop and go look at some cows? Sure. Want to stop and grab a bag of Cheetos? I mean, not my thing, but sure. Need to stop and use the bathroom? Go ahead. Want to stop for the night because you guys are too tired and drained? You can do that right there, right then. Ambient temperature control is at your fingertips. There's no one in your vehicle who doesn't know or understand the needs of you and your group. You get to control and decide the accessibility in your vehicle for everyone in your vehicle. It's a group decision. You're all in this together. You get to decide that accessibility. You have complete control over the accessibility, over that atmosphere is yours. And that's something you don't get on any of these other ones, is that level of control, of freedom during transportation inside that cabin. I guess all of these vehicles have cabins. Anyway, I wonder where that etymology came from. So, with that, let's move on to our last mode of transportation. All right, finally, our last mode of transportation. Planes. Now, I need to admit, before I get into this last section, I have a phobia of airplane travel. I know the statistics. I've been on planes. I think from an engineering perspective, airplanes are fascinating and beautiful. Not maybe as much as boats or submersibles, but yeah, water and air from a physics perspective are effectively both fluids. And so planes are And planes are engineering-wise very interesting. Exposure when I was younger didn't help with riding planes. It only made it worse for me. And so that's something that's not abnormal, not completely abnormal for individuals, including exposure therapy doesn't always work for everyone. So why am I telling you this right now? Because I think it's important to admit my potential bias when I want to give you objective information. And I want to give you objective information, so I need to tell you that before I go into this. So, let's get into airplanes. So, visiting the ideas of negatives, a logical first one to start with is there's a relatively common phobia of airplanes, of flight. Not necessarily logical, as I said. I know there's no logic for my for my phobia of airplanes, of getting on an airplane. I'm not afraid of the plane itself. I'm afraid of getting on one and riding on one. Why? I don't know. Getting through an airport check-in can be a hassle. Temperatures on an airplane can be too hot or too cold, and you have no idea what the people around you will be like, and you don't necessarily know what the quality of food will be like either. So one thing I'll get into I'm okay. Give me a minute. I'm not on a plane. I'm on the ground. I'm not on a plane. I'm on the ground. Not on a plane. I'm on the ground. Okay. Feet flat on the floor. Okay. Panic attacks are a thing, and they're okay. They happen. I know I'm okay. It's okay. So, honestly, and potentially unsurprisingly, one of the things I struggled with airplanes was finding positives. And the two biggest positives I found were that traveling traveling by group is relatively easy, just like it is with buses. And out of all of these modes of travel, barring high-speed trains, potentially, planes and high-speed trains are the two fastest forms of transportation on this list. I would like to take a moment to point out that different airlines have different histories with accommodation. Similar to buses, most airplanes will point to being that they follow whatever the current country or countries' disability support laws or regulations. And sometimes even what staff or individuals you get on a flight can influence how well a flight goes. And I even know that from my personal experience. I've had individuals on flights who have made it more bearable and those who have made it more difficult. So let's move on to talking about mixing travel before we wrap things up and look at some comparisons and bring this all home. Its own unique blends of chaos. Even just going from one form of transportation to another of the same type can cause disruption. However, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's easier. I don't know about you, but I can't fly an airplane from the airport to the hotel. I gotta take something else along the way. Gotta ride or rent a car or hop on a taxi or something. So mixing and blending travel can be necessary. But it is a factor to remember when traveling, and it's something to prepare yourself and those with you for as well when you're planning how are we getting from point A to point B. And again, in the next video in this series, we'll talk about how you can prepare for the time and for each mode of travel that you've picked to make those easier, flow better, more pleasant, etc. So let's move on to a quick review and comparison before we wrap things up. All right, let's look back at a quick review of the ups and downs we went over for each form of travel. Boats, they're slow, there's major phobias, seasickness, actual sickness, there are large floating cities, privacy, and nice views. Trains have limited accommodations, they're small and cramped, private spaces on overnights, and they're relatively inexpensive. And they can be quite fast. Buses have limited accommodations, they're cramped, they're prone to OCD and phobias, they're inexpensive, and they're better for large groups that know each other when you have disabilities and the like. Cars are cramped, costly, no free or guaranteed no free Wi-Fi. Car sick, you have the most control, and you have only people familiar with you and the people you're traveling with. Airplanes, there's phobias, there's the security checkpoints and the stuff that comes with them. Temperature control and predictability. They're tight and small and compact, but they're super fast. They're great for groups. All right, so what do you think? Did you agree with the given positives and negatives? Did you feel anything was left out? Did I miss anything, especially for airplanes? If I did, I'm sorry. Please let me know down in the comments. Did you want something tackled? Do you want something tackled? Not did. Well, both did. Did and do. Did and do you want something tackled? Let me know down in the comments. If you like this video, please click that little like button. I'd love a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel. It'd be super helpful. Share it with someone you care about that you think it would help. And if you stick around to the end on YouTube, you might get some recommendations to find more related content. Or if you're watching it on Dailymotion, you'll find my logo with information on my link tree, where again, you'll find more content. So one last thing though, before we get to the end, I want to say thank you for watching. I'm glad you're here. You, your family, your loved ones, you all matter. You make an impact. You're important. Life can and is incredibly difficult and unforgiving. Don't give up. Don't give up hope. Don't give up courage. Hold on to the little things. They matter. And you and what you're fighting for and your family, you're worth it. All of you. I'm Mike Malcolm, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.